The Stanley Cup Finals, the biggest stage in all of hockey. While the finals can hold some truly memorable moments, not every matchup is a classic. In fact, some can be rather predictable, and dare I say, even boring. For every thrilling Game 7, there's a 4-game snooze fest, and for every Cinderella story, there's a flat-out flop. Well, with the Stanley Cup Finals happening right now and there being so many gap days in between games, I feel like it's fun to talk about different years and different Stanley Cup Finals that have happened throughout at least my lifetime. Now, a few days ago, I talked about some of my favorite matchups since 1999, and today, we're going to be doing the exact opposite and talk about my least favorite Stanley Cup Finals of my lifetime. So if you guys are enjoying the content lately and you want to support this channel, be sure to give this one a thumbs up and subscribe now. It really helps my content get pushed out there, which allows me to make more stuff like this. So with all of that being said, let's get into our first one of this video. Actually, guys, before we get into the topic of today's video, there's been something I've been meaning to do for a while now in my uploads, and that's read off some of your comments with each video on the previous one that I uploaded. But whenever I press that record button, I just seem to forget. I don't know why. But today, I didn't forget. So let's go back to my most recent upload, which is my most memorable moments of the Stanley Cup Finals since I was born. And these are some of the best ones that I found, or at least some of the ones that I thought were funny or just deserved a response. So the first one comes from @UFCMania155. He says, "You said that you were born in 1999 and that you were 6 in 2004. You would have been 5, and the Blackhawks definitely weren't a dynasty. They couldn't even win back-to-back cups. They were one of the best teams in the league in 2013, but they were never a dynasty in the 2010s. First off, I don't know what to tell you. I was just recording. I couldn't do the quick math in my head, so you're probably right. Second off, the Blackhawks were most definitely a dynasty. They won 3 cups with the same core. That's kind of the definition of a dynasty. You don't really have to win back-to-back cups to do that. In fact, I consider them to be more of a dynasty than the Penguins and the Lightning. That's just in my opinion, but hey, thanks for the comment either way, and thanks for correcting my math." Next comment comes from Caleb Green 7005, who says, "Completely missed the Caps' magical run in 2018. Best moments of my life. Beating Pittsburgh in the second round honestly felt better than winning the cup itself." Thanks for the comment, Caleb, but I think that a lot of people might agree with my takes in this video. Stay tuned for that. But the Caps' run in 2018, it was great and a really fun watch, especially since it was finally the year Alex Ovechkin won the cup. But realistically, if you weren't a fan of Washington that series, it was pretty dull overall. But in the end, thanks for the comment. I'm glad you enjoyed the video. The next comment comes from Roach-J3E, who says, "Let's go 99 gang. Great video, bro. Keep them coming." Appreciate the comment, man, and your support. Stay tuned. Got plenty more in store for you. And the last comment from that video we're going to read off today is from @thejoec2005, who says, "I keep reliving 2014 over again as a Rangers fan. It still hurts." Yeah, that one was tough, but still one of my most memorable finals. I remember watching that to this day, staying up late. The goaltending battle, it was spectacular. But if you guys want to be featured on future videos like some of the comments I read off today, be sure to drop your thoughts in the comments below during or at the end of this video, and I'll see if I can read some of them off in the future. But you guys have waited long enough. With all of that being said, let's get into the topic of today's video, which is my most disappointing Stanley Cup Finals of my lifetime. So I have 8 different matchups to discuss today. So at number 8, this is where I have the 2018 matchup between the Washington Capitals and Vegas Golden Knights. Now, I know some of you are probably screaming saying, "What are you talking about, Jimmy? This one was fantastic." Now, hear me out with this. The matchup was great. The ending, getting Washington and Ovechkin his first cup, was great. But the series altogether, it was short-lived and kind of disappointed. This was an historic moment for the NHL. The Washington Capitals and Alex Ovechkin had finally earned their long-awaited Stanley Cup. And while the storylines were emotional and very rewarding, the series itself, not so much. Vegas was the miracle expansion team, and unfortunately in the finals, they just ran out of magic. After a high-energy Game 1 win, the Golden Knights dropped 4 straight to Washington. None of those games went to overtime, and Washington overall was just the better team. Again, storylines were great, but the games themselves, they really lacked any suspense, making the finals kind of lackluster. Again, I get it. I understand why people enjoyed this matchup because on paper it was supposed to be spectacular. But in the end, even as someone who was rooting for the Washington Capitals that year, I found myself kind of bored just because I expected this one to at least go to 6 or 7 and it ended so shortly. Vegas didn't have enough to compete with Washington. They were just too good that year, and that's why they're on this list. Not because the storyline was bad or the team that won was bad in any way, just because the matchup itself, it was pretty underwhelming. Coming in at number 7, the year I was born, I have the 1999 matchup between the Dallas Stars and the Buffalo Sabres. This series was bad for all of the wrong reasons. While Buffalo and Dallas played tight, low-scoring games, the series as a whole lacked offensive flair and felt more like a war of attrition than a showcase of hockey's best. But what really cements it as a bad final is the way it ended. Game 6 went into triple overtime, a dream scenario for every hockey fan looking for drama. That is, until Brett Hull scored with his foot in the crease, a direct violation of the rule at the time. The NHL scrambling to explain the goal infuriated Sabres fans and undermined the integrity of a championship that could have gone to the Sabres. Buffalo still hasn't made it back to the finals and has been on one of the longest playoff droughts that we have seen throughout NHL history. And this controversy to this day remains one of the most bitter endings in Stanley Cup Finals history. This one's pretty self-explanatory and realistically could be even higher on this list, but I want to leave you with one question. Do you agree with this call or do you disagree with this call? It's something that I really want to hear from you guys about. Coming in at number 6, this one is a back and forth one, I feel like. I've heard people say that they enjoyed this finals, maybe because they're a fan of the Kings or maybe a fan of New Jersey in some way, and then I've heard the complete opposite. But for me, this is one of my more disappointing ones, and that's between the Los Angeles Kings and New Jersey Devils back in 2012. On paper, this one had a lot of potential. LA was the 8th seed and New Jersey had a pretty loaded roster, but even with LA steamrolling through the playoffs, their opponent in the Devils just never felt like they belonged. The Kings jumped out to a 3-0 series lead, really ending this series for the Devils before they could even get themselves involved. And while they did manage to scrape 2 wins together to make this one 3-2, that Game 6 ending being blown out 6-1 by the Kings, it just really took all of the tension out of this one. It didn't help that the Kings were also 10-1 on the road, so they were one of the more tougher opponents to face in your own barn, and overall, their dominance, it just made this series boring in my eyes. Again, a lot of potential in this one, but if you compare the 2012 and 2014 finals, I will take that 2014 one 10 times out of 10 in comparison. Not a bad series by any stretch, but when I look back and the hype that was surrounding this one, I think it overall just disappointed. Coming in at number 5, I'm going to take you back to the back-to-back cups by the Pittsburgh Penguins, and there were 2 to choose from here. I thought the San Jose one was not all that exciting, but in comparison to Nashville, I think it kind of was a little bit more entertaining. So at number 5, I'm going to put the 2017 matchup between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Nashville Predators. The Pittsburgh Penguins' 2017 Stanley Cup run was pretty entertaining. That is, until they got to the finals against the Nashville Predators team that just overall lacked compete, and the drama and storylines around this one just weren't that great overall. The Penguins were very talented, and while they were outshot and outplayed at times, they still managed to win a lot of those games that they probably shouldn't have. That was largely thanks to stellar goaltending by Matt Murray, and then, of course, opportunistic scoring by the Pens. Nashville was playing in their first ever final and did bring some energy, especially from their crowd. You could see that hockey is very alive in Nashville right now, but ultimately they were undone by inconsistent officiating, which some people like to go back on, but again, who really cares what the refs were doing at the time? And of course, a lack of finishing. Matt Murray just completely took over in this one, and the Predators just couldn't get enough goals to outscore a very talented Penguins team. This series really failed to deliver on the excitement that maybe some fans had hoped for. Again, like I said, Nashville really showed that they're a hockey town after the finals, but in the end, their lack of real star power compared to Pittsburgh and skill compared to the Penguins just kind of made the series a dud. So that's why I have it on this list. It wasn't the worst finals, but it was definitely one that I feel could have been a lot better, maybe if it were a different opponent than Nashville. Maybe that's a bad thing to say, but that's kind of just how I felt in the end. At number 4, obviously this was going to be on the list. This is where I have the 2020 Stanley Cup Finals between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Dallas Stars. Now, before I get into what I have written down, I gotta say, I do feel like this finals gets a bad rep just because of everything that was happening in the world at the time. But to get into it, the 2020 Stanley Cup final between the Tampa Bay Lightning and Dallas Stars was considered mainly boring by fans due to several key factors. Of course, the most glaring was the fanless bubble, making the series lack energy, emotion, and intensity because there was no live crowd that could bring all of that to the playoff series. Tampa Bay dominated most of the series with a methodical defensive style that just completely stifled Dallas, who, by the way, were dealing with injuries to key players. But we don't like to mention that because, of course, everyone's dealing with that at the time. While this finals had its ups and downs, Tampa was clearly the better team, making the drama and overall storylines of this one just very limited because the series was never really in question. Even when the Stars pulled out in a few games, we always just felt like Tampa was going to win in the end, which took almost all of the excitement out of this one. The Stanley Cup celebration felt muted. There was no really big moments because the fans and families weren't present, just kind of making this whole series feel flat and forgettable at times. But given how they played throughout circumstances, I do think that they deserve a lot of credit for the effort they put into this one, but I still got to put it on this list. It just wasn't my favorite to watch. Coming in at number 3, this was another one that was touted to be so exciting, but ended up just being a bit of a dud, and that's 2023 between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. This was another final that promised so much, but in the end just delivered so little. Florida, the surprise 8th seed who had taken down the President's Trophy winning Bruins, was taking themselves to the finals in a run that felt like one of the more surprising Cinderella stories throughout history, but their opponent, the Vegas Golden Knights, they were incredibly loaded, and it felt like a complete mismatch from the very start. Vegas completely destroyed Florida throughout this series, and while there were a few nice moments from time to time, Game 5 in particular really stands out to me. A 9-3 domination, the biggest blowout in a cup-clinching game in 100 years, just taking this series and making it one of the more, biggest duds of the past quarter century in my eyes. Matthew Tkachuk was injured. The Panthers never really found their footing against this dominant Vegas team. And unfortunately, the storybook Cinderella run for the Cats came to a very, very bad ending. I had such high expectations for this finals, watching the Panthers just surprise everyone in the East, and then Vegas, of course, steamroll their way to the Cup in the West. I thought this matchup was going to be way more competitive, and in the end, it just wasn't. And Vegas proved to us that they were just way too good for the Panthers. So, yeah, this one was disappointing to me. I expected a little bit more from the Cats. Of course, they came back, won the Cup the next year, and now they're in the finals again. So, they're all good. But, yeah, this finals itself, it wasn't very entertaining. Coming in at number 7, let's go all the way back to 2007. And this is a matchup that I have between the Anaheim Ducks and the Ottawa Senators. Coming into the finals, this series looked very promising. Ottawa had finally broken through with a high-flying lineup, and Anaheim had a nasty physical team with Pronger and Niedermayer. But don't forget, they also had some very skilled players, like a young Ryan Getzlaf, and of course, the man himself, Teemu Selanne. But this matchup was one-sided from the start. Anaheim bullied the Sens all series long as Ottawa's top players completely vanished. The Ducks would win this one in 5 games, outscoring the best team in the East who just didn't show up, 16-9. And the result was a series that felt over before it ever really began. And at number 1, I feel like most people agree with me on this one. The 2021 Stanley Cup Finals was maybe the most boring finals of the past quarter century. The matchup between the Tampa Bay Lightning and Montreal Canadiens was widely viewed as boring because it was just a complete mismatch, and the Montreal Canadiens were not competitive at all throughout this series. Tampa Bay was the powerhouse team with depth, experience, and elite talent going for their back-to-back cup run, while Montreal was a surprise underdog that overachieved in a weak division and playoff format. Truly, had it not been for the heroics of Carey Price, Montreal would likely have lost in the first round. Actually, let me roll that back a bit. They probably wouldn't have even made a playoff spot or even have been close to making one. The Lightning dominated the series, winning in just 5 games and rarely looking challenged. Outside of Game 4, in fact, Montreal looked like a team that never should have made the finals. Maybe I'm sounding a bit harsh, but that's just the reality. The format of the playoffs really aided them in their run. Games lacked intensity and drama, with Montreal struggling to generate any offense and often just looking overwhelmed because they had a young team that just wasn't built for this position. The limited crowd due to the pandemic's restrictions just dampened the atmosphere, and ultimately the series felt inevitable and completely one-sided, just lacking tension throughout, and the excitement without fans being in the arena just made this one a very, very boring and disappointing Stanley Cup final. I sound harsh. Montreal, they do deserve some flowers. Getting to the final, it is no easy task. But again, the inevitability of the Tampa Bay Lightning in this series just made this one kind of boring to watch. And I bet you less people watched that matchup than the Dallas versus Tampa one just because they didn't belong there. Carey Price was the team. I don't know. Maybe I'm harsh. Maybe I'm not. Let me know what you guys think about that final in the comments. But this is my list for the most disappointing Stanley Cup finals over the past quarter century. Do you agree with my picks? Do you disagree? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you want to support me and my channel, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss on any future content. And hey, I have some more videos for you guys right here on the screen to check out, including my most exciting Stanley Cup finals matchup of the past decade. So check that one out after this. Again, thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next episode.